The first time I saw my husband's fingers lace with my half-sisters in a crowded courtroom. Something in me went quiet the way snow muffles a whole city. Brianna's voice carried, sweet on the surface, metal underneath. "The court will side with us," she said. Chin tipped like a princess claiming a throne she didn't earn. Behind her, my father, Richard, and his second wife, Yvonne, stood with the relaxed faces of people who think the ending is already written. I kept my hands at my sides and the folder against my ribs, feeling the steady press of evidence and the steadier thud of my pulse. "I don't need to prove my innocence," I told the judge as if I were saying it to them. "I just need to show the world their guilt." The line wasn't for theatrics. It was a boundary built from 1,000 small cuts that finally scabbed into resolve. I used to believe you could love a family into fairness. In Fargo, where the horizon is so wide you think you could stretch yourself enough to reach everyone. I tried anyway. My mother, Evelyn, had left me her house and a lineage of sketches, sleek columns of pencil that moved the way fabric breathes. After she died too early, my father remarried quickly. And Brianna arrived with a cry that never quite quit. Yvonne called me the big sister like it was a job title with no pay. If milk spilled, it was my fault. If Brianna threw a tantrum, I hadn't soothed right. At dinner, the praise curved around the table and landed only on the child in ribbons. I learned to eat the silence like bread. There was one dress I kept in tissue, the sky blue sample my mother stitched when she was dreaming in florals. I found it once on my bedroom floor, seams gaped by careless hands, little flowers shredded under a heel print. Brianna, 14 and bored, shrugged. "It's just a dress." Yvonne's mouth sharpened into a knife. "Why didn't you keep it safe?" "Mara." My father nodded along, a metronome for blame. "They sent me to my room without dinner, and I sat on the carpet with the ruined fabric in my lap, the smell of old lavender and newer dust. The understanding settling. This wasn't clumsiness. It was a choreography. Push the first daughter to the edges until she believes the edges are her place. I worked anyway. After school at a consignment boutique. I learned the price of a hem and the value of a name. I studied nights. Took a design program that felt like learning my mother's handwriting again. A local legend, Lena Hart, touched my drafts and said, "You've got Evelyn's line, but your own spine." I saved enough to rent a narrow downtown studio with radiators that hissed like opinionated cats. I called the brand Evelyn Threadworks because I needed her near, and because it reminded me that threads hold even when voices don't. The house my mother left became my largest compromise. I let my father and Yvonne live there because I thought proximity could soften a decade of slight. It didn't. They wore the space as if they'd bought it. Left coffee rings on the walnut table my mother sanded by hand. Argued loudly near the stairwell where her portrait hangs. Still, I told myself that generosity was a kind of leverage with the universe. That if I kept offering open doors, the wind would eventually blow in my direction. Then Ethan Cole arrived in my life like a warm front. He showed up after a panel on sustainable supply chains with a paper cup and real questions. He laughed when I admitted I still stitched samples at 2 a.m., and his smile didn't look like a mirror begging for admiration. He was an accountant who said numbers made him feel safe in a world that didn't. And I believed him. When the brand doubled and I needed a financial grown-up, he slid into the role with easy competence and a teasing, "You trust me this much?" I said yes. A year later, I said vows under elms while Fargo light poured through their leaves like blessing. Small things went missing first. A Thursday evening that turned into midnight. A budget line item explained quickly and filed neatly. A memo about making eco-packaging more efficient that somehow meant cheaper. Worse. Yvonne began dropping by the studio with Tupperware and unsolicited opinions. "Hire Brianna," she said, like it was philanthropy. "She's family." My father's silence did what it always did. Co-signed. I hired Bree because I was tired of fighting and because sometimes peace feels more valuable than policy. She posted selfies from the showroom with captions that sounded like vapor and missed deadlines with a shrug I recognized from the blue dress on my bedroom floor. I wanted to be wrong about the glances between her and Ethan, the private jokes that flickered like moths near a lamp. When I walked into his office once and saw their shoulders leaning toward a laptop screen, Bree's hand resting too easily on his forearm, Ethan smiled in a way that tried to convince me of ordinary. Just campaign copy, he said. The next week, Nora, my accountant, sharp eyes, kinder heart, flagged consulting fees to a company called BW Atelier, small invoices tucked into ordinary weeks. I can't match this to any vendor, she said. I felt the floor tilt and kept my face straight. The way you do when a seam rips on stage and you decide to dance anyway. Cal from IT pulled email strings that unwound an entire sweater. BW Atelier was a shell. The inboxes showed everything. Ethan's timelines, Bree's counterfeit flattery, their hotel rendezvous coded as debriefs, the plan to siphon cash and clients, and then pry my mother's house from my hands because she won't fight family. Yvonne's messages read like stage directions. Keep pressure on the house. Push until she cracks. My father's name didn't appear. But absence can be its own signature. I printed it all and slid the stack into that same folder I held in court. The next morning, I fired them both. Bree hissed. Ethan threatened. I didn't raise my voice. I had finally understood that quiet is not surrender when it is full of receipts. Online, the smear campaign began before lunch. Posts about how I'd abandoned my niece, how success had made me cruel. The comments section did what crowds always do. But I had already called an attorney who speaks fluent strategy, and I had already remembered the girl on the carpet holding a ruined blue dress and promising herself she would not live at the edges forever. The day the petitions were filed, frost webbed the shop windows like careful lace, and for the first time in months, my breath didn't feel borrowed. Heidi, my attorney, read through our affidavits with the same focus I use to check a hemline. The ritual of making something hold under pressure. She tapped the page where Cal swore to the server logs, where Nora mapped every siphoned dollar to BW Atelier, where screenshots captured Yvonne's coaching voice. Smile soft, knife sharp. They built a narrative, Heidi said, but you built a case. The contrast steadied me. Online, Brianna's chorus of pity kept rehearsing, photos of a baby's sock beside captions about heartless blood. I refused to feed it. Silence isn't weakness when you're letting the truth ripen. In the studio, my team pretended normal, the way people whisper in a cathedral. Steam rose from irons, needles bit through organic cotton. The cutter's table shone under the skylight. Between tasks, eyes flicked to me like birds checking the wind. I called them together and told them what they already knew in their bodies, that we were under attack, that we would meet it with discipline. No DMC, no comments. I said, our work answers for us. Tessa placed a thermos of broth into my hands like a benediction. Joe folded me into a hug that smelled of starch and eucalyptus. For the first time since the emails, my ribs loosened. Then came the house. I drove there at dusk, when the light turned slow and merciful. My mother's portrait watched the entry like a guardian I could finally ask for help. Yvonne opened the door with a smile that made space for no one but herself. Come to apologize, she asked, stepping aside as if she owned the floorboards. Brianna sprawled on the couch, phone in hand. My father, Richard, studied a sports recap like it could save him. I didn't perform anger. I handed Yvonne the injunction blocking any transfer and the notice rescinding their license to occupy. Her composure cracked, then reassembled. She tilted her head. Family doesn't do this, she said. Family did this. I answered, and felt the sentence seat itself like a bone back into joint. I left before they could turn pleading into poison. The courthouse smelled like old paper and colder coffee. The judge had a face that didn't give compliments to facts for being dramatic. We sat, we stood, we swore. Martin, the litigator Heidi brought in, moved through the evidence with the quiet of a scalpel. He didn't linger on the affair. He carved around it to the muscle. Embezzlement, corporate opportunity theft, defamation. When he played the voicemail where Ethan said, once we have the house, she has nothing. The oxygen changed. Bree's lawyer objected, postured, claimed family expectation. Martin placed my mother's will on the lectern the way a mason sets a cornerstone. Intent controls, he said. Title controls. Not proximity. Not audacity. The judge took notes in a tidy script that somehow looked like mercy. Ethan tried to meet my eyes twice. I gave him the surface of a lake in January. It took everything in me not to remember our vows under the elms, to keep my brain from inventorying each kindness he counterfeited. There's a discipline to not picking at a scar while it's knitting. When Brianna testified, she wore grief like costume jewelry, bright, heavy, easily chipped. She promised to take care of us, she said, and I watched the pronouns slide around the truth like oil. The cross-examination pulled the lies clean. Dates contradicted posts. Transfers contradicted captions. The baby photo became what it had always been, innocent of its frame. The ruling arrived like a door unlocking. Ownership affirmed. Accounts frozen. A referral to the county attorney for fraud. Yvonne's mouth opened and closed with no sound. My father finally looked at me and discovered he'd run out of shrug. Outside, Fargo air bit my cheeks and felt like a baptism. Jill, the veteran designer who'd spotted my mother's line in my early drafts, was there with a paper cup and eyes that held both pride and history. "You stitched that clean," she said. I laughed, ugly and honest, because the body needs somewhere to put intensity once danger stops. The community pivoted faster than I expected and exactly as I'd hoped. Loyal customers posted their stories, fittings before chemo, a dress hemmed in, an emergency the morning of a mother's funeral. The time I kept the shop open late for a teenager who needed to feel beautiful without spending money. You can't fake a decade of small kindnesses. It's a fabric that doesn't tear easy. Orders doubled. Reporters came with soft voices and hard cameras. I said little and returned to the cutting table. Work is the truest press conference. Then a different ache presented itself. The child. Not a symbol. Not a cudgel. Just a human who hadn't asked for any of this. Heidi called with the practicalities. The new hearing dates. The probation conditions. The social worker's name. I drove to a thrift shop and bought a tiny quilt someone had pieced from shirts. Plaid. Chambray. A square of something floral, like a soft memory. In the spare room, I cleared a corner, set a crib, hung a mobile that turned slow as snowfall. I wrote a note and taped it inside the closet. You belong to yourself? I didn't know what co-parenting with the universe would require of me yet. I only knew I could break the loop that raised me. Back at the studio, we pinned the spring line on forms. The palette was Prairie Dawn, Bone, Saga, the blue that happens just before daylight admits itself. I threaded my machine and let the needle find rhythm. When grief surged, I fed it through the presser foot and watched it become a seam. Later, alone, I opened the cedar box that still holds what's left of my mother's blue dress. I didn't mend it. I don't want the lie of an invisible repair. I want what we survived to remain readable, even as we wear something new. Weeks after the verdict, the house was mine in every sense, but I walked through its halls like someone visiting a museum of ghosts. The floors creaked where arguments once lived. The kitchen still smelled faintly of Yvonne's perfume, sweet and synthetic, like a lie you've heard too often. I could have repainted everything, replaced the curtains, stripped the memories down to raw plaster, but I didn't. I left them there, as proof that survival doesn't require erasure, just reclamation. Each morning I opened the windows wide, letting the cold Fargo air sweep through until it bit my skin and made me remember that I was alive, that I'd won not just in court, but within myself. The town talked, as small towns do. Some whispered that I was ruthless. Others called me brave. The truth, as always, sat somewhere in between. I had stopped trying to be likable. I wanted to be whole. My company, Evelyn Threadworks, had become a symbol of defiance. Orders came in faster than we could sew. And magazines wanted interviews about female resilience. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in becoming a poster child for pain repurposed. What I wanted was peace, and the quiet rhythm of fabric sliding under a machine needle gave me more therapy than any headline ever could. The custody process for the baby, Lena, her name was Lena, moved quickly once the courts saw the wreckage her mother had left behind. Brianna's sentence for fraud came with restitution she could never pay, and Ethan's plea deal kept him from prison but barred him from financial work. The two of them disappeared from Fargo's social landscape like stains covered by fresh snow. When the judge signed the papers transferring guardianship to me, I didn't feel victory. I felt a strange, aching humility, holding Lena the first time, her tiny hand curling around my finger. I realized forgiveness isn't something you give to the people who hurt you. It's something you give to the parts of yourself they broke. At night, when the baby cried, I'd hum softly, half lullaby, half apology to the version of me who once believed family was something you could build by endurance alone. The house changed then, subtly. The cold softened. The air smelled less like grief and more like milk and lavender. Jill visited often, bringing homemade soup and gentle reminders to eat. "You're rewriting what home means," she said once, watching me lay Lena in her crib. "That's rarer than any design." One morning, I found an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a letter from my father. His handwriting wobbled, but the guilt was steady. He said he'd left Yvonne, that he'd found work repairing fences up north, that he wanted to make amends. He asked if he could see the baby one day. I read it twice, then set it in the drawer beside my mother's sketches. Some things don't need answers to have closure. Silence can be a boundary and a mercy at once. Evelyn Threadworks grew faster than I expected. We hired displaced women, single mothers, survivors, women who needed a second start. The studio buzzed with stories stitched into fabric, laughter layered over loss, dreams hemmed in cotton. Tessa handled the finances now, meticulous and loyal. Cal rebuilt our security systems, and we joked that he'd turned betrayal into a firewall. I watched the team flourish, and sometimes when the sunlight hit the window just right, I saw my mother's reflection faintly smiling in the glass. The Helen Dixon Fund, renamed the Evelyn Project in honor of both her and every woman rebuilding her life, took shape next. We hosted small workshops, teaching design, budgeting, self-advocacy. The first recipient was a woman named Rhea, a quiet seamstress who had fled an abusive marriage. When she received her grant, tears streaked down her cheeks as she whispered, "You saved my life." I shook my head. "You did," I told her. "I just handed you the scissors." Lena began walking around that time, wobbly steps on the same hardwood that once echoed with tension. She'd giggle when she fell, dusting herself off with tiny palms. Watching her, I learned what resilience really looks like. Not stoic endurance, but joy that insists on existing despite what came before. In her laughter, the house sounded different, alive again, redeemed. One evening, after everyone had gone home and the baby was asleep, I sat by the window with a sketch pad. The moon hung low, silvering the outlines of the garden. I drew a new collection. Fluid lines, gentle strength, threads that curved like growth itself. The final piece was a long coat embroidered with blue wildflowers, a nod to my mother's ruined dress. I planned to name it The Reclaimed. Sometimes the past still tapped on the windows, faint as wind. A headline about Ethan's bankruptcy, a letter from Yvonne's lawyer seeking a settlement conversation I never answered. But the difference now was that I no longer flinched. Pain had become context, not identity. I had work to do, a child to raise, and a world that finally matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. The night I opened the first exhibit for the Evelyn Project, women from across Fargo filled the hall. Each piece told a story. Survival turned to art. Betrayal turned to boundary. Silence turned to strength. When they handed me the microphone, I looked at Lena in Jill's arms and spoke the truth I had learned the hard way. "You can't stop people from breaking your heart," I said, "but you can decide what grows in the cracks." I paused, let the room breathe, then smiled. And sometimes, what grows is everything you were meant to become. Thank you for watching and walking through this journey with me. If Clara's fight, if my fight, reminds you of your own, know this: your voice, your dignity, and your peace are worth protecting. Subscribe to Vengeance Within for more stories of strength, justice, and the quiet revenge of rebuilding your life on your own terms.